Today I will be ranking all of Cedar Point's roller coasters in Sandusky, Ohio. This is one of the best amusement parks in the United States. So let's get right in. Number 17, Wilderness Run. This is the park's smallest roller coaster and only goes about 6 miles an hour, which is not that fast. What makes this ride interesting is this was the first ever roller coaster built by Intamin, which this park has a decent collection of Intamins, and this was the first park to give him a chance. And it's not that special of a ride, it's just a kid's coaster, so moving on. Number 16, Woodstock Express. This is a step up from Wilderness Run. This is a Vekoma Jr. coaster, opened in 1999. This is more of a family coaster than a kid's coaster, but it is a solid ride for the little ones to get introduced to roller coasters. It's pretty smooth, nothing too special about this coaster. It is alright. So, moving on. Number 15, Cedar Creek Mine Ride. This is the park's Aero Mine Train, which opened up in 1969. This is one of the oldest coasters at Cedar Point. It is the second oldest operating coaster in the park. This ride has some beautiful scenery going over the lake and everything, but this ride is really rough. It's janky. It's got some really bad transitions, personally. Like, the ride could be better if it was a little bit smoother, but it's an old Aero coaster. What do you expect from an old Aero mine train? But it would have been better if the transitions didn't jerk you around as much as they did on this one, because some of the other Aero mine trains are really good, but this one, roughness is holding it back. I usually have a tolerance for rough roller coasters, but this one, not really. It's really not that good of a ride. So moving on our list. Number 14, Corkscrew. This is the park's classic Aero Looper, which opened up in 1976. So this is the oldest roller coaster that goes upside down at Cedar Point. So this ride is really old. So this ride's been rumored for removal. I don't think these rumors are true, because this ride seems to be sticking around. Every time people think it's going to get removed, it will not get removed. But it has a chance now. But this ride isn't really that good. The drop is okay. The airtime is the best part. The vertical loop is just kind of your typical Aero Looper vertical loop. The corkscrews are really rough. They're not super enjoyable. This ride's just kind of It's not too special. And it's not bad, but it's definitely something I wouldn't be riding again anytime soon. Number 13, Iron Dragon. This is the park's Aero suspended coaster, opened in 1987. So this ride is kind of just okay. It's better than Corkscrew, but it's not really that great of a ride. It's not that exciting. I mean, the setting in the woods is nice, but most of the ride's just kind of bland. It's dull. Doesn't really do anything personally for me. It's just kind of slow. The pacing's kind of dull. I mean, it does have 2 lift hills, so it is a nice long ride, which I do enjoy that. But this ride just doesn't do it in the pacing department, unlike the other Aero suspended coasters like the Bat and Vortex at Canada's Wonderland. So this ride is just kind of dull. I won't really ride it. I'll just kind of pass by it on the way to Top Thrill 2, Steel Vengeance, Maverick, Millennium Force. I'll just pass by this coaster. Number 12, Wild Mouse. This roller coaster is kind of just okay, but it does have a nice spinning feature, and it has a twister layout, so it is different than your typical Wild Mouse roller coaster, which is really good, because most of the spinning Wild Mouse coasters, or just Wild Mouse coasters in general, are kind of mediocre. This one is pretty fun. Like, you get some decent spinning on this coaster. Like, it spins really good. It may not be as extreme as some of the other spinning Wild Mouses, but it has an original layout, unlike the other Wild Mouses, which makes it probably better than most of the other Wild Mouses I've ridden. This ride's solid, but I wouldn't go on my way to ride it. Number 11, Blue Streak. This is the park's only wooden coaster, which opened up in 1964. This ride is really good. It's underrated in my opinion. This ride has some really good floater airtime. So this ride has some amazing airtime. The first drop has some decent airtime. The first few hills have some really good airtime. Like, this ride just has a good out and back layout. It's just pure fun. It's not super intense or anything, but it's just pure fun. There's one thing I wish this ride did better, which was smoothness. This ride could use some Gravity Group pre-cut track, because this ride does have some rough spots, like in the valleys between airtime hills, which this ride could use some improvements. But this ride is pretty solid, and you should take some time out of your day to ride this. Number 10, Valravn. This is the park's BMM dive coaster, which opened up in 2016. This ride is one of the weaker coasters in the park. I don't really care for this ride, personally. It's just kind of okay. I think this ride's kind of stale, personally. The layout isn't really my thing. This coaster type isn't really made for me. I don't think dive coasters are really my thing. Just personally, even if they're really good sometimes. Like, they're not really my thing. And this layout is kind of dull. It's just the beginning of every other big 200 plus foot dive coaster with a vertical drop and Edelman. It's just kind of boring at the first part. Like, then you take a turn up into the mid-course. The mid-course ruins the pacing personally on this ride. Like, I like the mini dive coasters better because, personally, they don't have mid-course brake runs most of the time, and they have faster pacing. And then the second half is probably where this ride shines. It's got an okay dive loop, and then you got a slow-motion 0G roll, which is really good. This inversion's pretty good, but I just wouldn't go out of my way to ride Valravn. I'll ride it every once in a while, but I won't ride it all the time. Coming in at number 9 is Rougarou, the park's BMM floorless coaster, formerly a BMM stand-up coaster named Mantis. So, this ride originally opened in 1996 as Mantis, a BMM stand-up coaster. Mantis closed in 2014 and then got converted into a floorless coaster, which means it got a new paint job, new name, Rougarou, and then got the floorless trains. So this ride is probably better than it was as Mantis, but I never rode Mantis, so I can't really say, but it's probably similar to Green Lantern at Six Flags Great Adventure. The layouts are pretty similar, except the second half, so I could probably compare these two to each other almost. So, this ride has some underrated elements, like the valleys have some strong positive Gs. The inversions are really good for an old school BMM. A lot of the old school BMMs have better inversions. The dive loop is one of the weaker inversions, but it's still solid. The turnaround doesn't do too much, but you take it at a decent speed, so it's alright. And then you go into an incline loop, which this is my favorite inversion on Rougarou. It's the most intense, it's got some really good G's. Then you go into a little switchback, which has some good airtime. And then you drop off the mid-course. This drop doesn't have any airtime, it's not anything too crazy. And then you go into a corkscrew, your final inversion. This one's got some good whip to it. The second half is kind of just okay. It dies off. It's got some good turns in the spaghetti bowl section, but nothing too crazy, I'd say. But people should not be hating on this. Coming in at number 8 is Gemini, the park's racing hybrid coaster. This ride is super underrated, just like Rougarou. This ride just doesn't get talked about enough at Cedar Point, because there's just other rides that people like to talk about. So this ride is a racing hybrid coaster by Aerodynamics, which opened in 1978. This ride has some underrated elements like the head chopper on the blue side, and the airtime just throughout the ride is really good. This ride has some strong airtime, some are light ejector moments, but most time you're going to get some floater airtime. This first drop is underrated, which is better than Magnum's drop, which is way bigger than Gemini's drop. Gemini's drop is solid, and then you go into a typical turnaround, which doesn't really do anything, and then you take another drop. It's a small little drop, but it does give some nice airtime if you're sitting in the back row. This ride has some amazing airtime. If you're just sitting in the back row on the blue side, this ride is just pure fun. The airtime is amazing. The racing feature is super fun. Like getting the high five on like the turnarounds is really fun, which is an underrated feature on racing coasters in general. When you can high five someone. This drop right here is really good. This airtime hill is really good right here. Then you get some nice views of Top Thrill 2 or Top Thrill Dragster or Magnum XL200, which you get some nice views of while you're taking this turnaround. And then you have a nice drop, and then you go into the head chopper if you're on the blue side, which gives some really good airtime. And then you go into the Helix Finale, which this part offers some nice laterals, so this ride's solid. Coming in at number 7 is Magnum XL200. This is the original hyper coaster. So this was the first coaster to go over 200 feet. So this ride is kind of just okay. I think it's overrated personally. I think a lot of people would have placed this ride higher than me. But personally, I don't really like this ride that much. The first drop isn't really that good, personally. The first drop's just kind of mediocre. And then you go into a little airtime hill that turns, but it doesn't really do anything. It just looks cool. That's probably why they chose it. And then you go into a tunnel, and then another airtime hill, which does give some good floater airtime. And then you got the turnaround, which is just a mess. It's just really uncomfortable. The turnaround is just super uncomfortable. It's rough. The transition in and out of it is really bad. Personally, I don't really like this turnaround. It does kind of remind me if you flipped a Cobra roll and did it, and then like it was a non-inverting Cobra roll. That's what it kind of reminds me of here. And then you go into another airtime hill, which does send you up out of your seat. It's the first of many ejector airtime hills. You keep like getting thrown into the lap bar, which is the problem here. I do not like getting thrown into the tiny middle lap bar, which hurts your thighs, and your thighs will be in pain at the end of the ride. So coming up next on this list is coming in at number 6 is Gatekeeper, the park's BMM Week coaster, which replaced Disaster Transport. So this ride is pretty good, but it just is hit or miss in the smoothness department. Because sometimes it can be smooth, sometimes it cannot be. Like, it just depends where I sit on the train. Because this ride is solid, but it's not super intense or anything. It's super graceful, so it's not going to scare anybody off. The wing over drop is kind of solid. It's like you're just hanging there. You get some nice hang time. And then the valley is kind of shaky. The element is kind of just okay. The airtime hill is pointless. The keyhole is pretty good. So this ride is solid. It's really good. I would get a couple of rides on this coaster, but it wouldn't be an every time visit coaster. Coming up next on this list is coming in at number 5 is Raptor, the park's BMM invert, which opened up in 1994. This is my favorite BMM at Cedar Point. This is one intense ride. It's got some snappy transitions. It has a solid first drop. Like the vertical loop and 0G roll really are whippy and really intense. This is like Cedar Point's version of a Batman the Ride clone, which are really compact and intense. This is basically their version of that. The vertical loop is punchy like a Batman clone. The 0G roll is really whippy, and it's probably my favorite version. The Cobra roll is also underrated on this ride because it just whips you really hard. But a lot of unseasoned coaster riders might find a lot of headbanging due to the snappy transitions, not the ride's smoothness. If you ignore the snappy transitions, this ride is actually pretty smooth. But you just gotta mind that it's gonna have some snappy transitions being an older BMM, just like Rougarou. It's not gonna be glass smooth. in terms of the snappy transitions, unlike the newer BMWs like Gatekeeper and Valraven that have more graceful transitions, unlike Raptor. This is a solid ride. I will make sure to ride it every time I go to Cedar Point, at least once. Coming in at number 4 is Top Thrill 2. This is the park's former Intamin Stratocoaster, now a Zamperla Stratocoaster. It's also a Zamperla multi-launch coaster with the brand new Lightning trains. So this ride only opened for 8 days in the actual season, if you exclude the preview days. I did get to ride this. It was better than the original Top Thrill Dragster. It has more of a layout. It's not a one-trick pony like the original Dragster. The trains are more comfortable. You have more speed going over the top hat, which you actually get some really good ejector airtime over the top hat. The inline twist down the top hat is really good. It's got some really good whip if you're sitting on the right side of the train. So this ride is pretty good, but it's not my favorite coaster at Cedar Point. I'll ride it every time, though, I visit. Coming in at number 3 is Millennium Force, the park's Intamin Giga Coaster and the original Giga Coaster opening in 2000. This ride is a nice, graceful giant. It's more graceful than the other two Intamins. The first drop feels like you're falling forever. Most likely on other Giga coasters, you'll get that sensation. You'll gray out on the overbank turn. I always gray out there on a hot summer day. There's a nice low in the ground turn, showcasing the ride's speed. And then you go into a nice, graceful floater airtime hill. I really like this floater airtime hill. It's nice and graceful. The ride kind of dies off in the middle. Like, it doesn't really do too much in the middle part of the ride. It's just kind of repetitive. It's 2 overbanks. But there's a nice airtime hill that follows that, which gives some nice airtime, a low to the ground turn in the tunnel, a small little airtime hill, which gives the strongest airtime on the ride, into a final overbank, which doesn't do anything, into the final brake run. This ride is pretty solid. It's one of my favorite coasters, but I just feel like some parts are just dead spots. Coming in at number 2 is Maverick, which is an Intamin multi-launch coaster, the original, that opened up in 2007. This ride's got some really good snappy transitions. It's got some great ejector airtime, like on this hill shown right here. Some good snappy transitions. The horseshoe roll is just kind of average. It wasn't super memorable. It didn't have any force or whip or hang time to it, so it wasn't super memorable. And then you go into the tunnel, which has the best part of the ride, which is the second launch. It's pretty punchy for an LSM launch. Instead of going over a top hat, the train barely makes it over. It keeps its pace. This ride's really good. Coming in at number 1 is Steel Vengeance, the park's RMC hybrid conversion of Mean Streak, which opened up in 2018. So this ride's solid. It's got a solid first drop, but it's not the best first drop in the park. That goes to Maverick. But this ride has a good top hat, which has some good speed over it. But the outer bank is probably better and more memorable. You get some nice ejector airtime. And then you go into a hop into a 0G roll, the first of 4 inversions. And then you go into a wave turn, some great ejector airtime. And then you take a 0G stall, which is super snappy. And then you take a dip down. Then you do a double up into the mid-course brake run, which the second half is pretty insane. But it's really intense, but it's super repetitive. Like, it's just airtime hill, inversion, outer bank. Like, it's just kind of to me. Like, it gets repetitive, like, eventually. Overbanks, like, inversions, like, it's just kind of just mediocre in the second half. But it is really good still in the second half. I've just gotten used to the second half. So that will wrap it up for today's video. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you all next time.
Good afternoon, everybody. How's your